80 years. That's a lifetime. For over 80 years, the University of Wisconsin School for Workers, the oldest university-based labor education program in the United States, has pioneered and exemplified the Wisconsin idea in labor education. I'm David Newby, president of the Wisconsin State AFL-CIO, here to share with you an impressive record, one of innovation and achievement that lives on to this day. It began in Wisconsin, not the biggest or wealthiest of states, but one with a rich and diverse heritage, a microcosm of all the dynamic forces which have shaped American society. Milwaukee labor in the 19th and early 20th century, largely immigrant, heavily influenced by European socialist thought, believed in education as a means of human improvement. In the early 1920s, a Milwaukee Labor College was established. Though short-lived, it demonstrated what resources would be necessary to make a labor education program work. Labor support was only one factor in the creation of the School for Workers in 1925. There was also the progressive tradition of Wisconsin politics, embodied for over 50 years by Robert M. Fighting Bob La Follette and his family. The University of Wisconsin in Madison further contributed to the establishment of the School for Workers. A great University of Wisconsin economist and historian, John R. Commons, and students who followed in his footsteps, as well as many university faculty and administrators, provided the intellectual support and impetus toward the establishment of the School for Workers. They later taught classes at the school and helped to direct and fund it through the university. Another force in establishing the School for Workers was the Young Women's Christian Association. Concerned about the plight and conditions of working women in American society, the YWCA took action. Aware of the experimental summer school for women workers that was founded in 1921 at Bryn Mawr College outside of Philadelphia, the YWCA pushed for a similar project at the University of Wisconsin. Virginia Hart, who would come to have a long association with the School for Workers and who worked previously as an industrial social worker for the YWCA, remembers.
Yes, I feel very strongly about that. I hope I don't offend anybody, but to me the YMCA was more for swimming and exercise and hostel. And the YWCA had a social program and really trying to work at inequalities and helping poor people, helping women deal with race relations, all kinds of issues. And so they got into unions and the belief, in labor unions very early on.
A beginning was made in the summer of 1924 with 8 Madison working women as students who attended regular university classes in English literature, economics, and physical education. This first experiment was only a partial success. These young working-class women, though assigned university students as tutors, were not educationally prepared for the university-level work. The women generally enjoyed the summer, but were overwhelmed by the university and restless with the lecture method of instruction. This experience underscored the need for a different approach and a separate program for workers' education. As a result, in 1925, for the first time the school offered its own independent program of study for working women. It wasn't until 1927 that the Wisconsin Federation of Labor, which unfortunately was less interested in female than male workers, endorsed the concept of the school and agreed to recruit male students to participate in the program. In 1928, Alice Shoemaker was appointed Executive Secretary of the School for Workers after having served for 2 years as the YWCA's delegate to the school's advisory committee. She proved to be very capable in this capacity, and she pushed for greater representation and involvement by organized labor in the school. Under Shoemaker's guidance, the school gradually shifted from the Christian idealism of the YWCA to the utilitarian idealism of the Wisconsin idea, which projected the university generally as an institution of service to all citizens and constituencies of the state, and particularly serving the practical needs of working people. Not all students at the early summer sessions were sympathetic with unions. They debated the pros and cons with equal zeal. The school succeeded, however, in exposing these young women to a different life.
Today was one of the most delightful days. Dr. and Mrs. Commons invited us out to their beautiful home in the country overlooking Lake Mendota. It is one of the most beautiful places that I have ever seen. Hills and valleys, covered with rich green foliage, are visible for miles in every direction. Lake Mendota, with its surface dotted here and there with sailboats, motorboats, and launches. And our gracious host and hostess, old in looks, but very young at heart. Mary A. Hayes, 1925.
Alice Shoemaker described the experimental nature of early school for workers education programs.
We tried for an atmosphere of freedom, of informality, so that workers could overcome their awe of a highbrow environment and think naturally. We tried getting away from formalized subject matter and dealt instead with the stuff of everyday experience. What shall be the next developments in teaching methods? Who knows? But the school will keep on trying to feel the need of the hour.
As the Great Depression began in 1929, Alice Shoemaker perceived the key issue before the School for Workers, and indeed American society, as follows.
Is the machine to be our master or our slave? Are the workers to do their part in thinking out the problems that the machine raises and share in the responsibility for its control?
The Great Depression significantly changed the environment in which the School for Workers functioned. Over time, classes were increasingly drawn from local union membership, resulting in greater numbers of male students. The overriding concern was less on personal enrichment and development and more on the future course of society and the economy. Under Alice Shoemaker's leadership, the School for Workers solidified its relationship with organized labor. She may have begun from the YWCA's impulse for reform and belief in personal enrichment, but she also gradually promoted the cause of labor and reached out to union leadership and the American Federation of Labor. In 1934, Alice Shoemaker was appointed the school's first director. Overwhelmed by the Depression, Henry Ohl, Wisconsin AFL president, decided to relinquish the Federation's independent educational efforts in favor of working with Alice Shoemaker and the School for Workers. Throughout the 1930s, labor's role in the school grew, while that of the YWCA, other reform groups, and philanthropic employers declined. Some of those formerly active in founding the school or doing fundraising became disturbed that students at the school were becoming militant trade unionists and organizers. At the same time, funding sources for the school were shifting from private donors to organized labor. Alice Shoemaker also oversaw the expansion of the school into winter programs in various Wisconsin cities and the pioneering of a labor institute in the summer of 1931, which attracted 1,200 labor leaders, workers, unemployed people, students, and even a few employers. The institute format proved popular and was later adopted by various labor organizations. However, from 1931 to 1936, the school's small budget remained the same or decreased and was funded out of the Regents Unassigned Fund. Under Shoemaker's leadership, the faculty of the school identified closely with the labor movement and to varying degrees with socialist thinking. This made the school a target of some employers and conservative politicians. Throughout the early and mid-1930s, the school stood for egalitarianism, even in its teaching techniques, including a project method approach where teachers and students collaborated to create presentations around broad social issues. The School for Workers student publication, The Script, expressed this radical sentiment in 1934.
America has reached the end of an era. Capitalist society is crumbling. There is only one solution, a working class, educated, class-conscious, and militant that will take power into its own hands.